In August of 2018, we took our kids Gloria and Levi on a cross-country road trip. They'd never been further west than Nashville, even though they'd been as far south as Peru. It was high time they saw more of our own country. We packed up the trusty old minivan and struck out for our first stop, Ohio.
We saw a ton of old friends that we hadn't seen in years.
Friends that we haven't seen in a while.
The hardest part of the trip was being around my brother all the time.
After an evening of hanging out with old friends in Ohio, we set off for St. Louis, the gateway to the West. Just as we did at most of our stops on this trip, we met up with old friends. The museum under the arch turned out to be a real hidden gem, even though the family died of dysentery on the Oregon Trail. But as good as the museum under the arch was, it was not the best museum St. Louis had to offer.
My favorite part of the trip was the St. Louis City Museum.
The City Museum in St. Louis, which was actually one of the things I wanted to do specifically on the trip, and we had a good reason to stop there anyway. It far exceeded my wildest expectations. It was by far the most fun museum I've ever been to, and I can't possibly recommend it enough to anybody who ever has the opportunity to stop there. The nature of the museum is, as far as I can tell, essentially whoever started it hired a whole bunch of local artists, sent them to a scrapyard, said buy whatever you want and build whatever you want. The whole museum is very interactive in the sense that a lot of it is tunnels you have to crawl through or crazy slides, places you have to climb up. So it's this sort of gigantic multi-story jungle gym. It is visually and tactilely interesting, and it's all made from sort of found materials, and it is just an absolutely enormous amount of fun.
I'm actually really impressed that you fit in there.
We lost Levi more than once at the City Museum because he's significantly smaller than the rest of us, and he just kept popping into holes and tunnels that we couldn't fit in. Features on the roof of the museum include a Ferris wheel and a school bus that hangs off the edge over the street below. All in all, the City Museum is a pretty great workout. Also features a large dome which you can scale the underside of via a climbing cage. part, there were funny chairs to sit in while watching everyone else tackle the heights. After the City Museum, we hit the open road once more to cross into my home state of Kansas, where the kids had never been before.
I found the fact that Kansas was like even flatter than I thought it was surprising.
While in Kansas, we connected with more old friends, and we visited my childhood home and the church that I grew up in. And then we headed to Dodge City. At the Boot Hill Museum in Dodge City, we explored the Wild West, had sarsaparillas at the saloon, and got into a good old-fashioned bar fight. After Dodge City, it was straight on to Colorado. We stayed in Keystone, Colorado, a skiing town that has plenty to offer in the summer months as well.
In this trip, I learned that Colorado has a lot of big mountains.
One thing I learned on the trip is that while I still like mountain biking a great deal more, I don't hate horseback riding quite as much as I used to.
The hardest part of the trip was probably when we climbed the mountain.
The hardest part of the trip was hiking up the mountain. trip to Colorado, I learned how to go rafting, and the rafting was awesome. I gotta go mountain biking, but Mom and Levi moved out. Best thing ever.
My favorite part of our trip to Colorado was probably downhill mountain biking at Breckenridge with Gloria. We all attempted to do downhill mountain biking, but upon reflection, Carissa and Levi decided perhaps no, that wasn't their thing. But Gloria and I had an absolutely spectacular time.
In my defense, I'd never mountain biked before. Ever. Like, not ever. And he took us to Breckenridge. That's a giant mountain. So Levi and I had a lovely game of mini golf before connecting with more old friends we hadn't seen in years.
My favorite part of the trip to Colorado was my birthday because we had friends over, which made it really fun.
After our last day of exploring Keystone, we hit the road again to stop and see more friends in Nebraska. From Nebraska, we cut through Chicago and then headed on toward home.
The hardest part of the trip was the driving, particularly the drive home through Iowa and the drive from Iowa to Chicago. It was rainy, it was just difficult driving, it was long, it's extremely boring.
Going to Uganda.
In March, we will be traveling to Rwanda and Uganda.
Our next adventure is going to send us to Rwanda and Uganda. What's your next adventure?
In March, we will be traveling to Rwanda and Uganda and visiting some friends of ours and visiting some gorillas and...
Geo gorillas, not G-U-E.
Yes, well, we're not planning to visit any, soldier gorillas, just real gorillas.